Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's lovely to have you all with us. We're going to get started. This is being recorded, so anyone who doesn't make the start is able to watch this back. I'm joined this evening by Mr. Williams and Mrs. Orlovac. A really good opportunity for us to explain to you some of the changes that we've made to your daughter's reports and to talk about some of the reasons behind that and to give you a little bit more information about how we assess the girls at the Girls Prep and how we share that information with you. So tonight we're going to be looking at the key contact points throughout the school and where you have those options to speak with your daughter's teachers. Just obviously reiterating about our open door policy and then the reporting structure and what that looks like. Assessments in the school and how we run those and how they might be slightly different in some year groups in terms of the actual assessments the girls take, and then how you interpret those assessment results. And Mrs. Orlovac will go into detail there about the information you get on your daughter's report and how you can interpret that. And then we'll have an opportunity at the end for any questions. So those questions can come through to Mr. Williams and then he will filter those through to us. So thank you very much, as I said, for joining us, and I'll hand over to Mrs. Orlovac.
Good evening. So I'm just going to start by talking about the key contact points. At the end of last term, you were given information about the different ways that we contact you during the year. So reports being one, and that's imminent, coming out tomorrow, but also through parents' evening, ad hoc meetings, the times when you come into school to see the children's work. But above that, we would also encourage you, if there is a time that you feel you need to make contact with the teacher, there is this open door policy, as Mr. Cave-Arnold said, and that we encourage you to talk to the teachers. They will always be open to responding and will give you extra information that you might need. So we'll be sending this document out, the key contact points document, that will also come out with this PowerPoint and the recording. So the report's coming out tomorrow. So the key part of the report, you have a full form teacher's comment, as well as the children having set their targets. So they will have set an academic target and they will have also set a personal target, which will then get reviewed in the summer term. After that, on the reports, you can see the different areas of learning. So for both maths and English, there are 15 areas of learning, which the teachers have gone away and assessed each of those against either working towards age-related expectations, meeting age-related expectations, or achieving with greater depth. Now, they will have done that with a combination of either what they're seeing in class, so it will be through discussions with the children, their work in class, and also the assessments. And then they will grade that. Now, at this point in time, it is very normal for there to be orange on the reports. And so if your daughter is getting orange in some of those categories, do not be alarmed, okay? And orange means that they might not have come to that content yet, or they haven't shown sufficient evidence of that particular area of learning being achieved. But it is not to be alarming. And then by the summer term, obviously, if they've still got oranges on there, they haven't achieved the areas of learning, which is for that year group. So that would be more alarming by the summer term. Now, though, oranges is perfectly normal. It's also really important on the reports, when you get that, to look at the attitudes to learning. This is really gives you a good gauge as to how your child is working in class. And also the personal progress. So this is not about their attainment, the personal progress, but that is how they have worked from the start of the year to now, and whether they have made expected progress, which is what we would expect, or you might find in some terms a child makes above expected, or they've not quite made that personal progress for this point in the year. Now, a new addition for this year is that we have added on standardised scores to the reports, and I'll talk about where those standardised scores have come from. So you will get a standardised score for your child, and then in brackets on the report you will get the year group average. So just to give you an indicator of where your child is sitting within the year group. So that is a new addition to reports. So standardised tests and where we get those scores from. So it's any form of test that requires them to answer the same questions in the same way, and they'll be marked in a consistent way. It's useful for us as teachers in order to be able to compare the children to national requirements, but also within their year group. So we take these standardised tests every term, so it's a fixed points every term. Now, with any test, there are limitations. So it is just a snapshot in time, and it doesn't test them on everything that they have learnt. And again, because it's one snapshot in time, it could be a bad day for that particular child and it's not a true reflection of how they are performing. So we take these things into consideration when looking at those results. So Pira and Puma, you might have heard the children talking about, or you might have heard us talking about these to you. So all girls from year 1 right the way through to year 6 take these tests in maths and in English in the autumn, spring and summer terms. So Pira stands for Progress in Reading Assessment and Puma is our maths version. So each of these tests are standardised. All schools in United Learning sit these same tests, and so therefore we have standardised scores right the way across the group. So it gives us a good indicator of how they're doing nationally, but again within their cohort. So it also gives us age standardised scores, so we can take that into account, and we can also look at progress from one term to another. Now, obviously, we don't just use these test scores. We're looking, as I said earlier, at the whole picture. So we're seeing how they perform in class. Some children don't do well in tests, and it takes quite a long time to get them better at performing in test situations. Now, the other formal assessments we do is something called INCAS, and we do these in year 3 and year 5. So they assess reading, spelling, maths, mental arithmetic, and developed ability. So developed ability is made up of their picture vocabulary and non-verbal reasoning, but it is meant to, it's described as something that they've developed in their lifetime and they'll continue to develop in terms of learning. So it's a really good indicator for us of how able they are to learn at that point in time. So it takes into account their language acquisition and their non-verbal ability. It's also a really good indicator for children with English as additional language. So we use these different assessments to, it helps us to moderate how they're doing. It also compared to the Pira and Puma results, but it also gives that added dimension. It has the mental arithmetic in there and the spelling. And so therefore, if there is children who need specific support in those areas, then we can put that into place. Another really good part of the INCAS is it asks the children to give themselves a score from 1 to 5 on their aptitude to learning in reading, maths and school in general. So again, it gives us a good indicator how that child is feeling about those particular subjects. So standardised scores and how to interpret those. So we get a raw score, but we can then also convert that into the standardised score. So how do you interpret those? So an average nationally, a mean average is 100. And then within that, so you can see from this graph, up if you were getting standardized scores of 130, then you are in the top 2 percentile. Whereas if you are below that 100, you can see right down to sort of 70 would be very weak. But the average range you're looking at from between 85 and 115. So it just gives us a good indication of how they're doing nationally. Now from this following table, so you would expect, so nationally only 2% would be in that above 129, whereas we would expect, so we bolded out the top 3 categories, because that's really where we would expect our girls at Surbiton to be, is above that 105 mark, in that high average mark upwards. But it just gives you a bit of an indication as to where nationally children would be sitting within those categories. So at school, we track the children's results over their time at school, and which gives us a good picture of how they're doing, with the progress they are making within school. So a profile like this, you can see that child, so with a score of starting at 116, right the way up, going to sort of 123, and then dipping slightly with 122. Now within these, when you see the standardized scores, it's very unlikely that a child will sit with the same standardized score on every single test. It just doesn't happen. So there is slight variation within the tests. So for instance, if a child sits at greater depth, above that 116 mark, you could find that in one test they get 130 would be full marks, but yet in the next test they'd only get, say, 126 standardized score, but they've still got full marks. They can't get any higher than that. So we do look at it carefully, but a child sitting, as we say, in the blue, in the greater depth bands, we would be quite happy with those results, that even though there is slight variation, and you will see slight variation. Now each term, Miss McCabe-Arnold, myself, Mr. Williams meet with the teachers to discuss each pupil and the progress that they are making. And so as we look at these graphs, we would obviously have the discussions with the teachers and see, were there reasons? Have they noticed anything in class? So for instance, this child has sat roughly sort of above 120 in most of their assessments, apart from the spring term 2020. So having talked to the member of staff, there's good reasons, there's personal circumstances for that particular result. So we would not be worried by this one sort of offset result, but through discussions we can then work out sort of what's the best course. Have they just had a bad day? They weren't particularly well on that day, or there was other things going on. In a situation like this, where we've got mostly the scores are staying up high and then they've slowly started to deteriorate, we would have conversations to discuss, why do we think there have been a dip over two tests? Do we need to put some interventions into place to bring that child back up to where they were before? So these conversations are ongoing throughout their time in school, and we make sure that if there are situations like this, then we address it quite quickly. I think that is those are all the slides that I've got to share. Ms. McCabe or Mr. Williams, back to you for any questions.
So there's only been one question which I managed to answer, and I think you answered very nicely about these being national standardised tests. So obviously a score of 100 being the national average. So I think you've answered that very, very nicely. Thank you, Mr. Alderback. There are no other questions.
I wonder whether it's just to add to what Mr. Williams has said from that question, that PIRA and PUMA are national tests. They're not tests that we design at Surbiton ourselves. They are national tests that children take in schools across the country. So there are thousands, tens of thousands of children who are taking PIRA and PUMA, which means we have a really good way of that. That's why it's so useful, because we can track our children nationally, and then, like Mrs. Orleback said, we then look at where they sit in Surbiton. So they are national tests that the children take. They are nationally taken tests.
And as I said, that it depends, you know, which brackets we're looking at, those top three sort of tiers.
Thank you, Mrs. McCabe-Arnold. We have had one other question come in. Are the standardised scores timeline graphs going to be in the reports?
You want to? No, those ones don't. Not with the historic data. No.
That's something that that we would check and monitor ourselves at school. So those graphs are what we use at school to allow us to keep track of how your daughter is doing. We are now sharing all this data, or we always have done, but we are now explicitly sharing this data with you. But those graphs are used for us to track, because we can see trends and patterns, and also there are certain trends and patterns that happen across year groups, and that we find in certain points in certain year groups. We do tend to see dips, and we see that year on year, and that's because of, you know, sometimes it's to do with the way the questions are written, and that's a national trend. You know, you will often see a dip, from example, from the summer term to the autumn term, and that's often explained by the summer holidays. So if your daughter has done no reading over the summer holidays, or very limited reading, it wouldn't be surprising to see a dip in her PIRA score in the autumn if she's spent a lot of time away from books and not immersing herself in language, and that wouldn't be unusual. Equally, you know, some children are very what we call spiky, and they fluctuate a lot, and that's just who they are as a child, that they have really good days on tests, like Mrs. Orleback said, and then they have days where they just don't perform very well on tests. And actually that's part of what we do as well, is finding out, you know, the nuances of your child and how we support your daughter, so that, you know, test taking becomes easier for her, or whatever that need might be. And, you know, we have some children who are very consistent in maths and not very consistent in English, or vice versa. So there's an awful lot of nuance that goes in with these test scores, and that's why the graphs are helpful for us at school.
Thank you, and I think your answer there might help with this question and the idea of nuances. Will we be now getting the graphs in our reports moving forwards?
Oh, sorry. No, the graphs aren't in the reports. It's just the scores that you're getting. We, as on the slides here, these will be sent home, so you can see the national kind of, I guess, bell curve, as it were, of where those well, it's not a bell curve, but where it sits, the curve of results nationally. But graphs won't be sent home in the reports, no. Okay,
we're getting questions coming in thick and fast now. So I've got one here. Can I please clarify, the mid-year colour coding is benchmarked against full year performance expectations and not versus mid-year performance expectations? Maybe I'll direct that one to Mrs. Orleback.
Yes, so the colour coding is to the end of year expectations, not the mid-year. No, that's right.
And the question here is there a way of knowing how the children sit against other independent schools and not just the national average? I think that one's probably best directed to you there, Mrs. McCabe-Arnold.
I mean, we know where we sit against United Learning independent schools, and we set very highly, if not at the top in all of those. We're certainly at the top, or around the top. It's very difficult, I think, to get. We're quite lucky in United Learning that we have that information shared between the independent schools. It's very difficult to get a picture nationally of that, because a lot of schools wouldn't share their data, but we know from where our girls sit. And I think it might be worth, Mrs. Orleback, one of the things that, you know, we've talked about in the past is children, for example, scholarships. So children who might be awarded a scholarship, whether that's to our senior school or other senior schools, we would consistently be looking for them to be scoring probably in year 4, 5 and 6 in the 120, 125 category and higher. So if you think about scholarships as being the props top 2%, would that be fair to say? I think the top 2% of children in the independent sector, we would say you had a good shot at a scholarship if you were consistently sitting at 125 in maths and English. Now, there are children that sit higher than that consistently, and there are some that might be slightly lower in year 4 and are making gradual progress, and by the time they get to year 6, they're hitting that point. So I think that gives you a good kind of understanding. But where we sit very competitively with other independent schools with our results.
Thank you very much. And in regards to thinking about year 6 and decisions about senior schools, and obviously our main hope is that all the girls move on to the senior school, would it be possible to maybe have these scores shared more explicitly before these senior school options and as part of ongoing discussions?
Well, what we're doing now is that we are sharing these. We're sharing these scores in the report. So in this report, you will get the autumn term scores. And then Mrs. Orlovac, just to clarify, in the summer term report.
Yes, they will get the spring and the summer term standardised score.
And so by the end,
if any point any parent wants to know their INCAS scores, you are more than welcome to email me and I will happily share. So that's in year 5.
So those scores are shared. So by the end of the year, when you get your summer term report, you have all 3 assessments from across the year to give you a really good idea of where your daughter is sitting. And like Mrs. Orlovac said, you might see some fluctuation with that, but you might see very consistent results, and that helps with those decisions thinking about senior schools if you were to be thinking of other options. And then that's something that we would have a conversation with you, with you separately.
Thank you. There's a couple of questions around trends and if standardised scores drop or are not in line with the current trends that the girls have been showing. How do you report that to the parents, and what support they could offer from home?
So in terms of the fluctuation of results, like Mrs. Orlovac said earlier, children don't sit on a steady score the whole way through. So we do see fluctuations of 2, 3, 4, 5 marks are very normal. A fluctuation perhaps of 10 or more marks would be where we'd say, oh, there's something going on here. Is this just a case of, which happens a lot, they just performed quite badly, they had a bad day, they didn't have much sleep the night before? Children do fluctuate like that. So you can have a difference of 10 points when they're taking an assessment between the Monday and the Tuesday, for example. So very much we have to take that data that they get from assessments alongside everything else we know about that child. So it's very much a holistic view of your daughter and where she sits. If we notice a big drop in the scores, her standardised scores, and we're noticing less engagement in class, struggling to pick up some concepts, finding some of the work very difficult in class, then that would indicate to us that perhaps there was areas that she might need more support with. Equally, if we're noticing that in class she's really firing on all cylinders, she's working really hard, her achievement and her output in class is excellent, but there's been a slight dip in her assessment result, that would probably lead us to believe that that was just a bit of a dip, and actually we would expect that to go up next time. But it's all very much on a case-by-case basis. And I think the most important thing for us to say is that we will contact you if we think there's a concern. So if we haven't contacted you, if we haven't got in touch to say we're concerned, we're not concerned. And I think that's probably the best way to kind of go with it, that we will always get in touch with you if we feel that your daughter needs to do extra work at home, or if we feel that there are some areas that perhaps she's not as strong in that she could be. And we will always speak to you about that.
Thank you. So I've got a question here about what period of time does this report relate to coming out, and that being from September up until now. The staff have been changing those. Is there anything you would wish to add to that at all, Mrs. Orlovac?
No, I think that's absolutely right. It's from September up until now. Yeah, changes being made to colours in the last week.
Thank you. Question here about do the girls know they are taking the assessments? I would add to that they are, all the assessment weeks are on our calendar, on our school calendar, but how do we message that and how do we catch that for the girls when they are coming up to their assessments?
I would say we try and keep it as low key as possible. We want the girls to be as relaxed about these. I think it's part and parcel. They're so used to doing them termly. It's not something sort of new and worrying. They look the same each term. So I think they're quite used to doing those. So yes, as little alarm as possible would be my advice.
Very much so, very much so. And the last question here, are the tests taken at the end of each term?
They are usually sort of second or third week after half term.
That's perfect. I think, oh, there might be one more question. So we are reporting twice a year. So we're reporting halfway through this term and obviously at the end of the summer term with the detailed reports, but we are assessing every term. Is that correct?
Yes.
Perfect. And we've had one last come in where my daughter didn't start until after the October half term. Did she miss the assessments in that term?
Probably not if she started just after half term, because usually it's second or third week back.
Perfect. So they will be in this report coming up. Those are all the questions. So thank you very much for your time. I'll hand you back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Williams. Thank you to Mrs. Orlovac. And I guess it just remains for me to say thank you very much for joining us this evening. But please rest assured that if we have concerns about your daughter's academic progress, we always get in touch with parents. We want you to know so that we can work together to support her. And I think we're very invested, obviously, and as Mrs. Orlovac has said, about all the meetings we have at school. We're constantly monitoring and tracking your daughters. We're constantly looking at where do we put things in place at school to support her, whether that's letting you know, whether that's things that we're doing to stretch her a little bit further, whether that's looking at what her engagement is like, her effort levels are like, and we then will share that with you as we need to. But I think more than anything, the reports give us a good opportunity to let you know where your daughter is now. And as we've talked about this before with the change to our reports, that actually the children are changing all the time, and the report is only a snapshot of where your daughter is at that moment. And actually the most important thing is to have those conversations with us if you are concerned, and if you have any questions or you think, oh, I'm noticing something at home, please let us know. You know, please chat to us. We always reiterate our open door policy. We're always here to have those discussions with you. So please do contact us if you have any concerns or you have any questions. And if you do have any questions following tonight's presentation, please do let us know. The presentation and the recording for tonight will go home to you so that you can watch that again if you missed any parts of it. All the slides are there as well, so you can have a look at that data a little bit closer to see those numbers we were talking about before. But thank you very much everyone for coming along this evening. I hope you found that useful, and as I said, please do get in touch if you do have any further questions. Thank you.